تفعلون ما يؤمرون يا أيها الذين كفروا لا تعتذروا اليوم إنما تجزون ما كنتم تعملون صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah, inshallah we've got our guest, Nasheed artist, MashaAllah, Hafiz Shaib Saleh. One.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بسم الله الرحمن जब ज़ुबां पर मुहम्मद का नाम आ गया सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम जब ज़ुबां पर मुहम्मद का नाम आ गया जब ज़ुबां पर मुहम्मद का नाम आ गया आसमां से दुरूद व सलाम आ गया आसमां से दुरूद व सलाम आ गया सोज़े फुरकत से दिल जब परेशान हुआ सोज़े फुरकत से दिल जब परेशान हुआ लब पे ला तक नटू का पयाम आ गया लब पे ला तक नटू का पयाम आ गया जब ज़ुबां पर मुहम्मद का नाम आ गया आसमां से दुरूद व सलाम आ गया आप आए तो कुरान की शक्ल में आप आए तो कुरान की शक्ल में ज़िस्त का एक मुकम्मल निज़ाम आ गया ज़िस्त का एक मुकम्मल निज़ाम आ गया जब बड़ी हद से दीदारी की तिश्नगी जब बड़ी हद से दीदारी की तिश्नगी रूबरू मेरे माहे तमाम आ गया रूबरू मेरे माहे तमाम आ गया जब ज़ुबां पर मुहम्मद का नाम आ गया आसमां से दुरूद व सलाम आ गया ये भी एजाज़ है आपके नुत्क़ का ये भी एजाज़ है आपके नुत्क़ का बेज़बानों को तर्ज़े कलाम आ गया बेज़बानों को तर्ज़े कलाम आ गया जब ज़ुबां पर मुहम्मद का नाम आ गया आसमां से दुरूद व सलाम आ गया मैं जमील खुद उन्हीं का करम मेरे काम आ गया, खुद उन्हीं का करम मेरे काम आ गया। जब जुबां पर मोहम्मद का नाम आ गया, आसमां से दुरूद और सलाम आ गया, आसमां से दुरूद और सलाम आ गया। जब जुबां पर मोहम्मद का नाम आ गया। अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
There are quite a few questions, and I don't know if we'll have time to go through them all. Whilst we wait for the projector to start up, we can go through a few questions. La ilaha illallah, astaghfirullah. First question is, Islamic mortgage really halal? There are certain Islamic mortgages, certain mortgage schemes which have been authorized by certain Muftiyan Kiram. Which ones, how, what are the details regarding this? I'm not sure. If you wish to take out Islamic mortgage, then best is to find out if it has been approved by anybody. If it's not been approved by anybody, then ask some reputable Muftiyan Kiram who have good expertise in Islamic finance, and thereafter, and then accordingly, then you can take the decision of whether it is Sharia compliant or it's not Sharia compliant. You can't just give a blanket rule. There's no blanket rule, because every Islamic mortgage is different depending on the banks, depending on the terms and conditions which are there. One term and condition could make the entire thing which is halal into haram. So this is a very delicate thing. But as I said, if a person wishes to purchase an Islamic mortgage, then please clarify with the bank if it has been approved by anybody. If not, then approach a reputable mufti who has good expertise in this particular field, and thereafter you can find out. The second question is, can you take out a normal mortgage for a first-time buy? No. Mortgages are, if it's a conventional mortgage, then this is based on interest, and interest-based any transaction is something which is haram. Very simply, it is haram, and it has to be avoided at all cost. The severity is too great to take that risk and say, it's only a first time, it's a need. There's no real permissibility for it. There's no scope to make it permissible. There's other options which are available, but to take a mortgage, unfortunately, it is not something which the route you should be taking. Unfortunately, it has become very normal nowadays, where everybody is just taking mortgage for the new house, and it's just become very, very trivialized. But the reality, it is very, very harmful. The entire system of interest is extremely corrupt, and it's there to it leeches a person from their earnings. Just today, I read a tweet from somebody. He says that I got a student loan. I'll just read it out. It's quite. He says, I'm 27 years old. I have 120,000 in debt from an undergraduate degree. So I've been paying 970 a month for 5 years. And therefore I've paid nearly 60,000. And out of that 60,000, only 2,000 has gone towards my loan. So where's the rest gone? Because it's an interest, the rest of it is all being paid as interest. So the actual main loan is only paid this much. So it seems easy way out, and just pay some payments, etc. But it's a very, very, very tedious, and where it just squeezes a person dry. So a person should avoid taking any form of mortgage. I'm ready when you are. Just let me know, inshallah. Are you ready? Okay. Another question just before. Says, Salam, can you please finish program on time because food gets cold? If you come on time, we start on time. If you start on time, we finish on time. So you guys come on time and we'll finish on time. And if the food does get cold, you're not going to die, don't worry. It's all right, inshallah. Yes.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Can everybody hear me? Because obviously I'm not used to using this mic, so is it all right? Yeah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الحلال بين والحرام بين وبينهما مشتبهات أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Jazakallah firstly for attending today. Inshallah we'll try and keep it short. I don't want to boggle people with the technicalities too much. Inshallah we'll try and give a very simple take-home message for people who already know about some of these substances, but also people who are maybe not aware. So for the first time, if it's being introduced to you, we want to try and keep it quite simple. Before I start, can I just have a show of hands? How many people are registered healthcare professionals in the audience? I can recognize a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a handful. What about students? Anybody studying any healthcare professional related degrees? Without a student loan, of course. Or a couple. Okay, that's fine. So before we move on, I just want to point out on this thing. Obviously, I'm not an alim, I'm not a scholar. I'll go into a little bit of my background in a second. I don't want to go too much into the fiqhi aspects because obviously we've got ulama here and inshallah they'll be able to answer and address some of these questions. But I just wanted to point out this ayat and this hadith came to mind when I was putting this presentation together. So the first one is an ayat from Surah Ma'idah, and as you can see the word underlined is intoxicants. So some of the substances that we'll be talking about today fall under that category as well, so that's why it's pertinent here. And the second hadith, the hadith at the bottom there, The first part of that is that the Prophet ﷺ said to the nearest meaning that the halal is clear and the haram is clear, and in between you have the mushtabihat, so the things which is sort of a grey area or a buffer zone, you could call it. Now, if somebody stays in that grey area for so long, then it's not going to be long before he slowly creeps towards the haram. So I think in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a shepherd, he has some land and his sheep or his cattle, whatever it is, are feeding from the grass from his side of the border, and they're very close to the border of the other person's land, it's not going to be long before they start to go or creep into the other person's land, or they get caught in the fence, and before you know it, they're eating from the other person's side. So it's very important, because some of these products or chemicals, drugs, whatever you want to call them, that we'll be talking about today, some of them do fall into some of these grey areas, perhaps because there's a lack of research in this area, but until we know otherwise, it would be better to err on the side of caution. Next slide, please. So my name is Muhammad Patel. Most people know me. Surprise might be for many of you, my last name isn't Halifax. I'd just like to clarify that. So I'm a pharmacist. I've been working in the NHS for about 10 years now, alhamdulillah. So at the moment I work as a pain specialist in 2 pain services across the northwest. So I'm not an expert in substance misuse, because that's a very specific sort of speciality, but in my day job, because I work in chronic pain, I deal with a lot of these substances, I deal with a lot of queries from patients, and obviously delivering training to healthcare professionals and public and things like that. So I have some experience, but by no means I wouldn't call myself an expert in that sense. Let's have next slide. So firstly, what the session isn't about, and then we'll come on to what the session is going to be about, inshallah. So if anybody wants to leave, then they have the chance to leave after this, if it's not up to what you were thinking. So I've mentioned at the first point, we're not discussing today the medical uses for some of these substances. So there'll be many people who might be using some of these things for, for chronic pain, for anxiety, depression, for nausea and vomiting, if they're on chemotherapy, these kinds of things. There's lots of evidence out there about how some of these products can be used in different situations. We're not talking about that here. Today, obviously the topic is around the misuse of these products, or recreational use. So basically people using it just to basically get high, in summary. So that's what the focus is today. So I don't want any clever clogs saying, I heard this and I read this and I know that it can be used in this. We know that there are medical uses for these things, but we're trying to focus on things. Maulana Ashraf has given me 3 specific things to talk about today. Obviously, we'll try and cover them, inshallah. If you have a specific query relating to your own circumstances, obviously, if you want to share it in the Q&A, then by all means do. But if not, we'll try and address it at the end, inshallah, privately if needed. And lastly, as they always say, seek the advice of your own healthcare professional before taking any decisions. Next slide, please. So hopefully we'll learn about some of the common used substances. So the 3 that we're going to focus on today will be CBD, THC, and laughing gas, so nitrous oxide. We'll look at some of the harms and potential problems associated with these things, and some of the things, because it's a bit odd, because some people, they're like, why are you giving advice about how to use these kinds of things safely, when on one hand you're saying that they're haram or they're najais, etc. But sometimes we have to face reality, especially in a medical field, because people are going to use them either way, and so you have to still try and give them some sort of advice that if they are going to use them, they shouldn't, but if they are, then some things to just keep themselves safe as well. I'm not here to give any fatwas, as I've said, the ulama are here so they can try and address those things. And anything that's said in here, inshallah, try and keep it. I think it is being live streamed, but the camera should just be on the slide. So if anybody does want to share anything personal, by all means do. Next slide, Muslim. So quick poll, has just a show of hands. We'll try and make it interactive as well so people don't get bored. Who's heard of CBD in the Jamea? Can you put your hands up, please? Okay, quite a lot. THC? A bit more, so a bit more people than CBD. And laughing gas? Everyone's hand should go up from here. If you've not heard of laughing gas, have you seen these little silver canisters knocking about in the parks, in car parks, on the roads? You probably see them everywhere, but that's what they are. We'll come on to that towards the end. Does anybody know their name? Anybody just shout out, what does CBD stand for? Or what does THC stand for? Medical professionals can answer as well. Anyone? Yeah, close. So the first one, CBD, so that's cannabidiol. The next one, if just go back myself, sorry. THC. I heard somebody say, I think tetrahydrocannabinol, Umar, well done. And laughing gas, I just mentioned it before. Does anyone know the chemical name? Nitrous oxide, yeah, everyone knows that one. So again, this is a very simple diagram, but just to try and keep it simple, there's over 500 different substances or compounds within a cannabis plant. But to kind of split it into just an easy way to think about it, if you think of two strands, so you have your weed, which you traditionally or people will smoke, that's your marijuana, so that's that line. From there, you get THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, as you mentioned. That's the bit that gets you high. That's the bit that has the psychotropic effects, and we'll come on to that later, inshallah. And then the other strand is CBD. So that's been isolated basically because some clever clogs, I think it was actually 2 Israeli scientists in the 50s, found that if you isolate CBD, it can have some properties or some medical properties, but it kind of dwindled out because when they did more research, they found that actually on its own, the evidence isn't that great. But we'll be talking about that. But it's a bit weird because CBD in itself is not technically haram. And we'll come on to why. But the reason why it's important to mention it as part of this discussion is because even Maulana Ashraf, when he asked me to talk about these 3, I said, why CBD? Because technically there shouldn't be really any issues with that. But because there's so much confusion around some of these products, even within healthcare professionals, it's good to just clarify. But I won't focus too much on the CBD aspect or something. So CBD, as you can see in the picture there, there's different methods or different forms that you can take it in: oils, sweets, chews and things like that, creams, lotions, bath bombs, all sorts of stuff, and vapes obviously as well. You get different, so again, you'll get some other ones, but in general, you'll have 3 different types. So you'll have your full spectrum, your broad spectrum, and your isolate. So your full spectrum contains a lot of the other chemicals that are naturally occurring in the plant. Okay, so it's your full spectrum of all the different chemicals. Your isolate is just your CBD compound, so they've removed or extracted all the other things. So the things that make weed smell, the things that give weed their color, all these kinds of things have been removed, and that's why CBD is isolate. So you don't generally get any high or euphoric effects or anything like that from CBD, and that's why generally you find them being sold in pharmacies, in health and nutrition shops like Holland and Barrett, places like this, because they're not classed as a medicinal item. They're classed as a health supplement or a nutritional supplement. So the legal restrictions around it are not as great because it's not technically classed as a medicinal product. In terms of the dosage forms I've just mentioned there, the routes of administration, vape obviously is quite a common one these days as well. As I've said, accessibility is anybody can get hold of it pretty much. It's all legal as long as the THC content is less than 0.2%. So that's usually the threshold. So what you find in the shops or online generally, in a legal capacity anyway, will either be just CBD on its own or it'll have 0.2% or below of THC, because that amount shouldn't get you high. No matter how much you take of that CBD, if it's got 0.2% of the THC, and it shouldn't make you high. Now, that's from a sort of scientific perspective. Whether that's halal or haram is a different discussion altogether. But there are alternatives where you can just get CBD isolate on its own, and they're halal alternatives as well. So obviously there's an argument that is it a darura and these kinds of things like that. And if there's a halal alternative available, should you be opting for that instead? So these are not addictive and they're not prone to abuse. So you don't really hear about people getting high off CBD because it just doesn't happen. What's up next slide? THC, so this is the sort of the big one. And so it was interesting actually researching some of this stuff because some of these things I didn't know. Obviously, Mulsab told me about this thing called Jita juice, which is a lot of people here might know or might have heard of, and it's something that's creeping in amongst our youth quite a bit. So it's important to mention that. So this is basically the bit that gets you high. So when you smoke a spliff or when you smoke weed, basically, the bit that the chemical in there that gets you high is the THC. So that's the bit that we're talking about at the moment. So these are responsible for the highs, the munchies, all these things, effects that you get, the nausea, all these kinds of things that you get with smoking weed, you can get with these kinds of things as well. These pens, obviously, they're not legal in the UK, as we'll say, because remember we mentioned on the last slide, if it's 0.2% or below, it'll be legal, but anything above that is illegal in the UK. So these pens are mainly in certain states in America, so people obviously always find a way of getting them, even though they'll be illegal here. But they contain really high amounts. So some of these products, not necessarily Jeter juice, but other ones out there as well, contain up to 90% THC. You know, and so if you were compare it head to head with like smoking a spliff, for example, the amount that you get in one, puff of a THC pen can be like huge, even for somebody who chronically smokes weed, for example, and feels that they're very, desensitized to the effects and things like that. When they smoke these kinds of products, they then realize what a high really is, basically. So you need to be really careful about these kinds of things. And as I said before, in terms of recreational use, obviously these are haram because the only reason you would be using them is to get high, basically. In terms of medical use, as I said before, there are instances where some of these products might be sort of indicated medically, but there's lots of caveats to that. So it's not, something that you can just say blanket like, yeah, it's jaiz or anything. There's lots of different things that you have to look into, but we won't go into that today. As I said, it's illegal in the UK, these kinds of pens that are above that strength. The issue here is basically that there's a lot less. If I gave you, a 10 bag, for example, and said, go and smoke this or make a spliff or whatever, or just gave you a spliff, you're going to be like, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. You're going to be like, what the heck's going on? Why are you asking me to do this? If I gave you a pen and said, oh, it's just got some THC in it, automatically there's less stigma, less social stigma associated to it. You don't feel like a druggie. If you saw somebody with a 10 bag, you'd be like, oh, he's a druggie. You'll make assumptions in your head. Yeah, something like this. Somebody could be stood outside mosque, outside Masjid, smoking it. Somebody told me the other day, last week, that they met a Muslim brother just, I don't know, outside Masjid somewhere, Dari, Jabba, Topi, and he was like, oh, what are you smoking there? And he said, I'm smoking THC. Wallahu alam, I don't know what strength it was, what his reasons, perhaps he had a medical reason, but what my point is that it's a lot more common because there's no stigma associated to it, or there's less stigma associated to it. Obviously in terms of the smell, so it's very attractive for young audiences, so people who are obviously trying to hide from their parents or colleagues, siblings, etc. You get them in different tastes and different smells and things like that, so it doesn't leave that smoke associated, or the smell of bud, basically. Faster onset and more potent effects. So as I said before, because of the concentration of some of these products and the fact that you're inhaling it, and it's not mixed with like tobacco, for example, when you make a spliff, it's straight into your lungs and it's vaporized. Whereas when you smoke, it's a vapor, but it's slightly different. The vape, obviously, from a vape pen, it goes through a special like atomizer and things like this, so the drug content deposits into your lung very quickly and it's absorbed into the bloodstream like almost instantly, basically. So the absorption is really fast and really quick and gets you really high, basically. And it's not necessarily safer than smoking, because a lot of people say that, well, when you smoke a spliff, it's not the cannabis that's doing the harm, it's the actual tobacco inside. That's obviously not true. So they try and justify in their head or to other people that, well, this doesn't contain nicotine, so I'm not really smoking, I'm not getting all the harms associated with smoking a normal cigarette, for example, that has, tobacco inside it. So we only have a certain amount of evidence because these products have only been in use for a certain number of years. But as time progresses, somebody was just telling me today on my way to Masjid, that you should highlight that the long-term effects of these things, and it's true because we don't know what we don't know. So in 10, 20 years time, we might find that actually some of these products, which we thought were safe or whatever for a certain period of time, it actually turns out that they've got these long-term side effects as well. And yeah, the last point there, or the second to last point, it will show up on a drug test. So a lot of people, again, are under the misconception that because it's a vape and it's not smoked, for example, that you can bypass drug tests. So some people, I mean, maybe in this country it's not that common, but if you have like jobs that require drug testing, mandatory drug testing, for example, or if you drive for a living and they make you do random spot checks of thingy, this will show up. And if it's got a very high concentration, the chances are it's going to be in your system for a lot longer. Usually THC and stuff is what we call lipophilic, so it generally absorbs in your fat and in your muscles. So even after sometimes up to 90 days, 3 months after smoking one spliff, it could still be in your system, or it could still be detected in your system. And yeah, I guess the issue with this is that people, because the initial high is so great, when they come down, they think or they feel that, oh, well, I've got over that high now, whereas with smoking a spliff, they may get, let's say, a few hours of a high, and then they maybe get a come down. With these pens, sometimes they get like a really immediate high, and then it kind of tails off. So they think in their head that, oh, well, that's it, the high's gone, so I'm back now, I'm clean, that's fine. But obviously that's not the case. As I said, it can stay in your system for a lot longer. Obviously they're addictive, and these are prone to abuse. And I'll mention, I think on the next slide, so if you just go, yeah, some of the effects. I'll come on to one of the issues. So some of these things, again, just because it's being used as a vape, some of these side effects overlap with smoking a normal spliff, basically. So you can see on the screen there, bloodshot eyes, dry mouth, thirst, increased appetite, shifts in behavior and mood. Sometimes these things are long-term, so they're not seen immediately in the initial acute stages. They're seen over a longer-term phase. And then it's obviously harder to tackle. Anxiety, paranoia, distorted senses, hallucinations, psychosis, and that can sometimes then lead to doing stupid things or things that you might not normally do, like getting into a fight with somebody or running somebody over, these kinds of things like that. Distraction, memory loss, impaired coordination, insomnia. One of the biggest issues that people have with these products is even when they try to quit, they basically struggle. One of the main things they struggle is with the sleep aspect. So they're like, I can quit, I can handle the withdrawal effects, but the biggest issue is that I can't sleep and I need a spliff or I need some of this vape at night to just purely to get me to sleep. And that's one of the sad things about it. Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is just basically you get like cyclical vomiting or like really profuse vomiting. This thing here contains vitamin E acetate. I didn't actually know about this until when I was doing some reading. So this thing called EVALI, which is stands for electronic vape associated lung not infections, in lung something, I can't remember the last word. But basically what they found is that in a lot of these products, they contain this thing called vitamin E acetate, and that's been linked directly to lots and lots of thousands of hospital admissions and thousands of deaths, especially across America, Canada, places like that where these products are more freely available. But obviously if people are using them here as well, it's probably not going to be long before you start to see some of these things here as well. And these are although it's electronic vape associated lung injury, I think, yeah, the I stands for injury. So it does, on the name, it doesn't specify that whether it's to do with THC, it just talks about vape. But when you look into the actual research and the studies, majority of those people who were hospitalized or who died as a result were directly because of vape, these THC vape pens, basically. And there's just some stats at the bottom there that people, patients or people who use these products from a younger age, so under 18, when the brain hasn't fully formed all of its neural connections and things like this, that there's a higher chance of then going on and developing adult addiction. So that's why it's so important to my younger friends and the younger audience that, you might think, oh, it's just a bit of fun, or it's just something that can be passed off as just one-off. But if you get that, once you get that addiction, then this can have, reverberating consequences for the rest of your life. Next time. So as I mentioned before, this is the last segment of the thing. I'm sure people recognize these silver canisters. Even if you don't know what they are, you probably will have seen them at some point, knocking about in our parks, and when you go with your families, on the streets, in the car park, everywhere basically. And you can see the balloons there, because that's one of the ways of using them. This middle one here, Smart Whip, I didn't really know until recently that these existed. That picture there is from Notting Hill Carnival or the festival. They found, I can't remember how many tons of canisters they found. I'll go on to the reasons between these, because originally most people used to use these silver ones, but you might see them less, and that's not because people are doing it less, it's because people are using the middle one. So the middle one is basically like a 680 gram sort of canister. These little ones are like 8 grams. So obviously if you divide it, can anybody take a guess how many silver canisters are contained within that one thingy? Anyone want to hazard a guess? 60? More sounds maths good. Yeah, 80. So about 80. You get different sizes, but in that comparison, 640 whatever divided by 8 is about 80. So yeah, 80 canisters, the silver little ones. Imagine if you ever have smoked it, imagine, did you ever smoke 80 in one session? Perhaps maybe you did, I don't know. But generally that would take you a long time to get through. But the problem with this is that these new sort of ones that you get is so much more easy because you've got 80 canisters worth in there. And I'll come on to why that can cause some of the problems. So other names for this, obviously the chemical name is nitrous oxide. It does have medicinal use. Obviously people will know about like when women go into labour, things like that. When you go to the dentist, sometimes they give it you, but those gases are usually mixed or infused with like oxygen and stuff to make sure that you don't pass out completely. But these don't obviously have that, and that's part of the problem. Other names there, balloons, gas, laughing gas, whatever, whippets, things like that. So usually they come in a box of 25. You have like a metal canister. They're used for whipping cream, so you know people who work in like the dessert industry and stuff like that, they use them for that, and obviously to propel the cream and stuff like that out. So you basically crack the canister and you attach a balloon to the nozzle on one end, and you release the gas in there. So it's highly pressurized, freezing cold gas that comes out. Anybody who's used it will know that you can get frostbite on your hands, on your lips, things like that, and it can cause damage that way as well. And then you're basically breathing in and out of the balloon basically. So you're inhaling and exhaling in and out of the balloon. And if you're not breathing through your nose, which I'll come on to in a second, that is where you can get problems with the lack of oxygen, and that's what can then cause fatalities as well. So sometimes people breathe just in and out with basically their nose closed almost, and that's one of the things that causes issues. So obviously you get a very transient, immediate effect of euphoria. You get like obviously your blood rushes to your head, you get all this sort of calmness feeling, you might get these dizziness, you can't think straight for them sort of 10 seconds, and it's so, as I said, it's so transient and so transitory that people, this is how people justify it, that, oh well, it doesn't really, it's not a lasting nasha, it's not a lasting intoxicant effect, it's only 10 seconds, but if we think back to the first ayat that we mentioned, a time factor never came into the ayat, so whether something, you know, incapacitates you for 10 seconds or for 3 hours, whatever, the product is the product basically, and so that's the, you know, not really an argument that you can stand on. Obviously it's called laughing gas because sometimes people lose sensation, so they just all of a sudden start laughing over nothing, you know, giggling over nothing or some really small thing, and they just all start laughing. One person laughs and then everyone starts to laugh. You get sound distortions, hallucinations, things like that, visual or auditory hallucinations as well. I mentioned before about small canisters versus the large canisters. We've already, Mulsab said that. The reason why obviously it's a problem is, yeah, because you get a big canister is generally cheaper than buying, you know, if you were to buy 80 little small ones, you'll get a lot more, you know, bang for your buck basically if you were to buy a big canister, and it's a lot easier to use because the single canisters, you've got to like obviously crack it, chuck it away, put a new one in, crack it, and then attach a balloon and do it. So that takes a few seconds, but those few seconds that it takes in between is actually important because in that time you're getting normal oxygen into your system. Now with the big canisters, it's almost instant because you don't need to crack the canisters between. You just attach your balloon, breathe in and out, reattach it, breathe in and out, reattach it, breathe in and out. And so you're not getting you know, sufficient amount of oxygen in between, and that's what can lead to things. Now, I think I mentioned it later on, but most people do these things in cars, enclosed spaces, you know, small rooms, places like that, hot tubs, or, you know, where they've got like a hut on top, so there's really poor circulation and things like that. So obviously the amount of oxygen, if there's 4 of you in a car and you've all got a canister each and you're just constantly breathing in and out this thing, the amount of oxygen in that car is going to go very less, and so it's more likely to cause problems. Legality, as I said, so originally this was put under, when they started realising it's becoming a bit of a national problem, they put it under the Psychoactive Substances Act. That was for supply, so you could, basically most people just lied and pretended that they were selling it for, you know, dessert places and stuff like that. That's how they got about it. So it's very hard to prosecute someone. However, some of you did anybody see the news last week about laughing gas? No? Probably because Ramzan, maybe not many people are reading the news, but I didn't know either until when I started researching. Then I found that actually just last week our government basically announced that they've had enough. Yeah, Suella Braverman basically announced that they're putting in new laws. So basically this is going to be illegal even to possess it. So even if you're stopped with it in the street or in your car, whatever, there's going to be no excuses. So there's going to be a lot more clampdowns, a lot more stop and search enforcement. And because now, before it was under that previous act, the Substance Act, that gave the government or the police less powers to prosecute people and jail time, etc. Now it's going to come under the Medicines Act, basically, or Misuse of Medicines Act, and that means that you can go to prison for up to much longer, and it gives them more powers. So that's something to be aware of if you are using it. If you're caught driving, then you can probably get banned for driving and then jail time and things like that. So yeah, so that's just fresh, hot off the press, basically. So just you know, keep an eye out for that. As I said about the misconceptions, that yeah, people think, well, it's over within a matter of a few minutes, so it's not really an issue. It's not a traditional intoxicant, doesn't have a smell, doesn't linger. You know, within 10 seconds, I'm back to my normal self. And so Maulana Ashraf actually told me that a story just last week that there was a child. They must have discussed it in madrasa or whatever, that laughing gas is not halal or whatever. And then a few weeks later, the child came back to Maulsab and said, Maulsab, I went to a family wedding and all the adult males in the wedding house were doing laughing gas. And he said it puts obviously them in a very difficult position, because it's like we're telling them one thing, but they're seeing responsible adults. You know, you wouldn't see them people smoking a spliff or doing something else, but for some reason, obviously, we think in our head that this is normal or it's not as bad, and therefore we do it openly in front of other family members. Children often sometimes have a laugh and a giggle about it, and then, you know, record each other and things like that, people's reactions and stuff, and it's having obviously a knock-on effect on the younger generation as well. So that's something to be aware of. And generally, the people that use this are not your hardened drug criminals. Yes, they might use it as well, but the people that get admitted to hospital, which I'll come on to in a second, are people who are, you know, in normal careers, normal jobs, respectable people of the community, these kinds of things. And so you wouldn't, it's hard to just like assume who's doing it and who's not. And yeah, the second last point there is that a lot of these problems that you'll see when you research it, people always tell me that, oh, you know, you have to be ingesting a lot or in massive quantities or on a chronic scale to get some of these problems. But how do you define chronic use of laughing gas? There isn't a medical definition for it yet. There are some definitions proposed, but they're not conclusive, basically, so they're not accepted widely. So somebody using it for, I don't know, every day for a month, does that class as chronic use? Somebody using it, I don't know, a couple of times a week for 6 months, does that class as chronic use? So where do you draw the line, and where do you say that this actually classes as chronic use? And that means that they've got an increased risk of developing some of these problems, which we'll come on to in a second. What's up? And it's not just a local problem, as we've seen ourselves, national problem, international problem as well. So this is the article that I was referring to, that this is the law change, basically. So it's going to be even possession is going to be illegal. Next slide. So the data, basically, I was quite surprised at this, but yeah, basically after cannabis, it's the second most used drug in the UK, well, in England anyway. So the usage is massive. Over 500,000 16 to 24-year-olds have reported taking it in 2019, 2020. During COVID, they saw a dip in the figures, probably because of social distancing and all these kinds of things. But after that, there's been a massive spike, and I think the intake of those big canisters has shot up massively in that time as well. And so you will see the knock-on effects of that in the coming years. But the data is already starting to show that it's going that way, the trends. Rising amongst young people, as I say, 11 to 24-year-olds. Remember what we said before about under 18, the brain still isn't fully formed, you know, neurologically. So the effects, or the longer-lasting effects of this, can be detrimental. But also, if you look at the second one there, nearly 50% of 16 to 59-year-olds. So a lot older people who are, will have kids themselves, are more, responsible, adult homeowners, etc. And they sourced it from just normal people. They sourced it from friends, family, neighbor, colleague, people who are not drug dealers, people who are not seen as dodgy, things like this. So it's a lot more accessible for people. And I was really surprised to read this, actually. In the actual government report, it mentions this. I've copied it verbatim, basically. It says, may be more prevalent in communities who are less likely to engage with other substances for religious or cultural reasons. So they might think that alcohol or drugs, you know, cannabis, whatever it is, basically is haram. So they don't use those things, and therefore they're more likely to use these kinds of things which are seen as less harmful or less haram or less problematic. And so the use is increasing within some Muslim communities. Actually in London, the most of the people that walk through the doors in A&E are Bengali males, basically. That's not to say it's a Bengali problem, but majority, if you think of population of Bangladesh is about 90% Muslim, so the chances are those people, majority, will be Muslims, and that's my point. So that is the data does support that. So it's increasing within Muslim communities, especially amongst young people, and the prevalence of this obviously isn't really captured in official statistics, because when they ask people are not really going to own up to doing it, are they? Let's be honest. So the data on things like this is always a bit hazy. More deaths annually related to nitrous oxide in the last 8 years compared to the last 12 years prior to that. So as I said, the trend is going upwards, and the deaths that happen are not due to the gas itself, it's the secondary effects of the gas. So one of the things, as I said before, about asphyxiation, so basically you starve your brain and your body of oxygen because the nitrogen overtakes it, basically. And so you can get lack of oxygen, obviously collapsing, unconsciousness, and then it can lead to other things as well, like this arrhythmia. People who drive and do it can be, in an accident. Malta, I was telling me the other day, saw 2 Muslim lads just, driving on Manchester Road, or they stopped at a traffic light on London Road. He saw them and they had balloons in their mouth, laughing and taking it while they're driving, basically. So it's very dangerous, putting yourself at risk, but obviously other road users as well. So people die from that. So if he has a crash, it's not the actual thing that's caused the death, so it's a secondary effect. So on the death certificates, you'll see obviously that it'll be a secondary cause. So some of the data behind this, you have to look at it from that perspective. Yeah, this thing was really shocking from the Royal London Hospital. Just one example, that they used to say that prior to this all kicking off, we used to see 1 or 2 cases maybe in a year of like neurological problems because of laughing gas. Now they're seeing almost 1 or 2 cases a week. That's just in London. So this is a problem, in the UK. It's a problem in up and down the country, basically. So yeah, massive prevalence, and as I said, most admissions are young people, not your generally hardened sort of criminals or drug users, and they generally fit in well, so they might be going to the gym, things like this. So when they go and present to A&E, it's a bit confusing, because obviously the staff are like, what's going on here? Like, it's generally fit and healthy. Why they got these neurological signs and symptoms and things like that? So it's sometimes hard, and unless the patient tells them that, yeah, I use this laughing gas, then obviously it's harder to diagnose as well. So it's important that if something does happen, we'll come on to that in a second, that if you have to go to A&E, that you mention this to somebody or mention this to the healthcare professional, that I use this thing. What's up? Next slide, please. So we've already been through some of these things. Some of the common things that there, obviously you can see the picture, that's like a frostbite or in his lip, basically. Must have put the canister. This guy actually breathed directly from the canister, basically, without using a balloon, which is obviously stupid, but so some of the common things that people get is this tingling, and that's what I want to kind of focus on. You can read some of these things. I don't want to list them all one by one. The main thing is the neurological problems, which is what we're seeing. So most people know that one of the biggest problems is the neurological issues that it can cause. So it can cause an effect on your coordination, your balance, your walking, your speech, all these kinds of things. And the main thing is because of that, as I've put in bold there, the vitamin B deficiency. So basically the nitrous oxide, it basically makes the body deficient of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is your nerves or your neurons. It has a lining, a sheath over it called a myelin sheath, and basically this vitamin B12 is really important in that process, and if that is depleted, you get a breakdown of that myelin sheath. So people who have MS, for example, or multiple sclerosis, they have a problem with the myelin sheath sometimes as well, so they get a breakdown, so then your nerves are not doing the job or not able to do the job that they're supposed to be doing, basically. And so that's when you start getting, numbness, tingling, electric shock type sensations. And it's not just peripheral changes, so your hands and feet, it can be central as well. So your spinal cord can directly be affected. And this is one of the things that they're seeing. Literally, people are paralyzed for life, like completely, they're in wheelchairs or bedbound basically, or they can't walk, or they have to walk on crutches for the rest of their life because they got that severe spinal neuropathy basically. Yeah, they've actually now obviously drawn up medical guidelines that if somebody comes to A&E with these signs and symptoms, this is what you need to do to treat it. So it's becoming such an issue that they've had to, the Neurological Society in England have come up with guidelines on how to treat it. And if you mix it with other drugs, just lastly there, that if you mix it, then obviously nobody knows what the consequences of that is. Going to be a lot worse, because a lot of drugs, for example, alcohol, things like that, already cause respiratory depression, so they suppress your breathing rate. And if this drug is doing that as well, then it's just going to more likely to lead to fatalities. Next slide. So this is just quickly just some examples. We'll skip over that one. So just quickly want to run through these are real life cases. You can read about them on the internet. 26-year-old female, London, started using at the age of 18 recreationally, just with her friends, as people do. She was admitted to hospital because she got initial like numbness, tingling, things like that. After she was discharged, she thought she was better. She carried on using it, and then obviously it developed from there. It got worse. She developed effectively an addiction to it, a psychological addiction, so she just needed to chase that high. It relates back to what Mulsab mentioned in the first week in the other talk about the dopamine effect and the reward system. So that's what she was chasing basically. And this is recent, so last year basically she's unable to walk. She can walk inside a house short distances, but if she goes outside she needs a wheelchair basically, and that's just direct cause. My message to other people is don't do them, it's not worth it. At least educate yourself and know what damage it can cause. I didn't listen and I hid it from friends that I was doing it. So a lot of this happens a lot, where people that use drugs, it starts off recreationally and socially, they do it with friends, even laughing gas, but then it becomes a point where they become that addicted that they start doing it on their own, and it becomes a thing where they're not actually doing it for social reasons now. They're doing it because, you know, they're addicted to it, so they'll go out in the night on their own, or they'll find time and space to do it on their own as well. Next slide. The next one, just want to mention, 16-year-old boy, 16-year-old lad from Cheshire. He used nitrous oxide at a music festival using the small canisters. But prior to that, a couple of weeks before, he used one of those big canisters. Mum came home, he was still in bed, she realised something's up. He said to her, I can't breathe properly, and she could hear this really horrible crackling on his chest. She looked at it, felt it, and she said it felt squidgy. She was pressing her fingers into his chest, and it was literally like a sponge basically. His chest was caving in almost. Went to the hospital, they did x-ray, CT scans, they couldn't figure out what was going on basically. And it's only when they questioned him, they were like, oh, you know, maybe you went to the festival and you were on somebody's shoulder and you fell, or you banged into something and something's caused this trauma and impact on your chest. And they said that he then admitted that actually I've been using this nitrous oxide. And that's when they then found that actually it developed a pneumothorax basically. Effectively, he had a hole in his lung and air is escaping, and so you get obviously this problem with the lungs. So he had to have an operation, obviously, to remove the excess air and everything in that time. And, you know, his mum, I think this quote's from his mum, that until you see a person who's lying there like that, you don't know what them balloons do to you. You know, it might seem fun at the time, but yeah, these are the kinds of consequences. He was so lucky, it could have left him paralysed. He was lucky that they caught it quite early and he managed to get a thing. But look at the effect on his life at that point. 16-year-old, couldn't sit the remainder of his GCSEs at the time. He used to be into sports, football and rugby, and even though he's recovered, he's not fully recovered, you know, in terms of his lung capacity and his lung function. He's not been able to return to sports and things like that he used to be able to do. Next slide, what's up? I think that might be it. Staying safe, lastly, quickly just to wrap up, abstain in the first place, that's the best form of cure. As I say, if you are using from today, make an intention. It's obviously Mubarak gathering, Mubarak night, you know, in the month of Ramadan in the Masjid. So make intention and take each day at a time, like Mulsab said, in the first week, and seek help if you need to. You know, drugs and alcohol services that normally used to focus on other things, they do look at THC and laughing gas as well now. Peer support, you know, have a pact within your friends that, look, we'll all stop it, so there's no pressure on other people. But if they keep insisting that they do it and you're finding it hard and you're struggling, then I would seriously reconsider who you call friends, because if they're the ones, if he's driving and you're sat in the passenger and he's doing gas while you're driving, it's not really, you know, a place where you want to be if something happens. If you do use them, and I say this very reluctantly, but if people are going to use them, make sure there's adequate ventilation. If you're using them in cars, make sure that you open windows, things like that. Don't use it excessively. Have gaps in between, as I say. Give your body some time to, even though you might have got over the high, your body is still starved of oxygen at that point, so you need it give it time to recover. Beware of frostbite, things like that. don't drive or operate machinery. Consider the legal implications, as I say now, from now on, laughing gas in particular will be illegal. So, the knock-on impact, if you get caught and arrested with that, then, you could be in your job, everything could be at stake. And seek help, if you do get any of these symptoms, especially the neurological symptoms, then, if you go to A&E or something like that, if you go to the GP, do mention that this is something that you've used. Don't think of it lightly, that it's probably nothing to do with it. Next slide, I think that's it. Yeah, that's fine. I think the last slide that's it now. Yeah, that's it. Wa ma tawfiq illa billah. Jazakallah, I think that's it. If there's any questions, I'm also going to do questions there.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu nusalli ala rasulih karim abad. Okay, Jazakallah. Hafiz Muhammad or Khalid, when the future, just do ishara and we'll try and finish off as soon as we can thereafter, inshallah. Before I just go on to a few things I wanted to mention about today's program, just want to mention about tomorrow. So, alhamdulillah, we had one of the local brothers that came after the first week session and requested if we could do one on gambling. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him, inshallah. So we have organised that will be tomorrow by Hafiz Suhail Ugadar, inshallah. So that one will start straight after Tarawih tomorrow. To give Musa maximum time. That is obviously an issue which affects a lot of people, and he won't only be talking about the gambling that takes place in betting shops and casinos, etc. He's going to talk about online gambling. Musa, just remind me if I miss anything out. In-game gambling is in-game purchases, etc. I think he's going to touch on a bit on crypto as well, and if how the mentality in crypto can kind of go over into gambling and vice versa. Was anything else? I think that was the three main things that he mentioned. So I think some of those things, except for even for parents, one thing I asked my madrasa class 2 years ago, I was asking all the boys, how much do you spend on in-game purchases? So one guy said 20, and another guy said, this is a month, yeah? This is a month. One guy said 20, someone says 50, someone says 100, someone says 5. One lad, £500 approximately per month in-game purchases. £500 per month. And I said, did Dad know? My dad knows. I think I need to talk to your dad instead of talking to you. If your dad then gets credit card, you're spending £500 a month on in-game purchases, give me that money instead. Or give it to the Madrasa project instead. But anyway, so most I'll be talking about that as well, inshallah. That will start straight after Tarawih, and inshallah be hopefully a 3-course meal thereafter, inshallah. And there's another announcement is, if you want to contribute towards the food and the running costs of the programs, please do so, inshallah. I think there'll be buckets outside, or just talk to one of the volunteers, especially Haji Yassin, Hafiz Muhammad Andera, or Khalid Asmal. But if you want to contribute whatever you can, whether it's 100, whether it's 10 or whatever, it's okay, inshallah. Okay, coming back to today. So initially when me and Mawlana Zahir sat down to think about the topics, we just said drugs, that's it. We just said drugs. And then during Ramadan, we thought to ourselves, a thought came to mind, okay, everyone knows about weed and heroin and coke, etc. But things that's largely used is like THC, like Brother Muhammad has already clarified and mentioned THC, CBD, laughing gas, canister, etc. And the reason this came to mind, which is partly said, but I want to say it from my perspective, was in Madrasa and obviously Mu'tala, etc. With time and time again, we're telling the kids, alcohol is haram. Intoxicants are haram, this is haram, laughing gas is haram, etc. All these different kind of things, right? And the kids will say, no problem. You're right. Then what happened, I was standing in the street corner once and this kid comes up to me and he's a streetwise kid, proper streetwise kid, yeah? He goes, what's up? Isn't THC haram? Or isn't laughing gas haram? Sorry, it was laughing gas. He goes, isn't laughing gas haram? Or should you be taking it? I said, no. I go, what's up? Yesterday now, I was at a wedding and there was all these adults that were all having laughing gas. And these are all 27, 20-year-old plus, yeah? There's no adults like 24-year-olds. Now, the mentality of the child is this. I was told at the age of 14 is wrong. I've just seen a 27, 30, 35, 40, 45-year-old taking it. A responsible young adult having laughing gas. He must have been lying about it. It's not wrong. It must be fine. These guys are responsible. I've nobly been told that by the time you get to 25, it's out of your system, you don't do it. So the question to everyone now is, that this misconception that we have, that yeah, it's only until you're 24 years old, it's only until 20, 23, but see, everyone loses the hype and it goes. That's incorrect. That's completely incorrect. Because now what we're seeing is that age is now increasing until the age of 35, 40. So what's going to happen to our children and your children? What's going to happen? They're still going to be drinking alcohol at the age of 50. They're going to say, okay, by the age of 50 we'll come out of it. And before you know it, it's going to be completely, they'll be dying. Inshallah, it doesn't happen, but they'll be dying with these intoxicants. And you know the thing is, yeah, one of the worst things is that the people that supply it, you don't see the effects of it. You don't see the effects of it. You know who sees the effects? The leaders in your community. Mu'talha sees the effects of it. When that parent rings us, and you know, for a parent, let me put this very straight to you, yeah? And I see get this a lot in school as well. And it's embarrassing for me. You get a 40-year-old parent, a 50-year-old parent, will you talk to my child, please? Just listen to me. Do you know what it takes for a parent to say to a stranger, talk to my son? It's so embarrassing for them. My son doesn't listen to me. And do you know what at the end? Please don't tell my son I told you this. That's how scared they are. We see the effects of this. The effects of talking to a youngster after he's had his high. Allah, you were saying this. I didn't say anything. Allah, you were Allah? No, I didn't say anything. He doesn't even remember what he's done. When they're coming at certain times in the state of being drunk, Muslim youngsters, yeah? I'm not talking London. I'm not talking some Birmingham or something. I'm talking Frenchwood, yeah? Keep it local. They're coming in the state of being drunk, and they're trying to talk to you, and they're saying the most funniest things ever. Or they've gone home. I've mentioned this 2 years ago in one of the Ballons in Ramadan, that I asked this youngster, so you know, about, they were drinking, they had alcohol. So what they did was put it in different bottles, and I go, where do you drink it? He goes, in my house. Drinking alcohol in the house. I go, you done not say anything. Yeah, my dad found out. He goes, don't worry about him, and I did it when I was young as well. Astaghfirullah. Astaghfirullah. A parent is encouraging his child to drink alcohol. Yes, you might have done it when you were young. What's the guarantee your son's going to stop? What's the guarantee? There is no guarantee. You guarantee me your son's going to stop, and okay, tell okay, it's not halal, but we'll let it carry on for now. There's no guarantee it's going to stop. Look at people now. 35, 40, 45, they're still doing different things. You know, I was listening to one of the Ballons of Sheikh Sulaiman Mullah, and he mentioned a very beautiful hadith. لا يشربن ناس من أمتي الخمر يسمونها بغير اسمها. I'll just translate to Lucy to your nearest meaning. That you'll drink alcohol, or they have intoxicants, maybe under a different name. What's laughing us? A different name. What's THC? Just a different name. All the different intoxicants are having, it's just a different name. Another story I mentioned to you, a youngster asked him, so he's that drunk, and he's like, my son's, you know, he's off his rockers, and you know, he's smoking weed inside the house now. Okay, so I was talking to him, and this guy, yeah, he came to our school, a grade 8 or grade 9 student, yeah, had lots of potential ahead of him, a really good, it was there 5 times the Masjid, when he died, 5 times the Masjid used to be there. So then I was having a chat with him when he wasn't high, and I asked him, okay, what happened? He goes, basically outside college. No, sorry, I didn't ask him, I asked one of his mates what happened, and they told me. He goes, outside college, outside Nafias basically, right? And having E-Cig, this is where you all started from. He told one of his friends to fill his tank up. They thought they'll play a prank on him. They put THC inside instead. He's had his THC, he's high. Whilst he's high, one of his mates is smoking weed. So he goes, oh, give me a drug. Give me a drug, he has that drug. Now he gets addicted to that as well. Now he's smoking weed. Before he was hiding, now he does it in the backyard, then does it inside the house. He destroyed his entire future. He destroys his entire future. Alcohol to another one. Again, this is local. All these stories are local. Yeah, none of them are from outside. None of them from YouTube or anything. Another local one, this lad, we went somewhere, we took the lad somewhere, and on the way back, there was this one lad, I just knew that he wanted to talk to me about something. So he goes, drop me off last. So I said, no problem. We dropped everyone off because he didn't want to talk in front of his friends. Their friends makes a massive difference. In front of his friends, he was all high and that, but when his friends went there, he opened up. So he goes, I'm drinking, I want to stop drinking, etc. And what do I do? At first I said, how did you get into it? He goes, curiosity. Curiosity. He was in college, had some non-Muslim friends, they were having alcohol. He said, taste it. I said no. Then I thought, let me taste it. Had a sip, had another sip. I thought, oh, this is all right. carry on drinking. And then I realized that my mates were doing it as well. And I thought, this must be all right now. He started drinking. He goes, now I can't stop. Now his mother is trying to contact me that, please help my son. He comes home drunk. I'll tell you one last one before I hand over to Montalha. I'll tell you one last one. And this one really, it should really hit home. And this is something to do with laughing gas and THC. So this young lad, I think about 17, maybe 18. He's high all the time, yeah? He comes home, his mom tells him off. Constantly tells him off. He's getting frustrated. Why is mom always telling me off for? I'll tell you what level he stooped to, how low he went. One day he comes home, his mother tells him off. What does he do? He beats up his mother. This is Frenchhood. I'm not talking deep, I'm not talking Birmingham, I'm talking Frenchhood. It might have been a few years ago, but this is Frenchhood. What did he lead him to? His mother had to kick him out of the house, go. She kicked him out of the house. She couldn't stay there. So he couldn't stay there, he had to leave. This is what these kind of things lead to. So yes, you might, if you're not doing it, alhamdulillah, don't ever do it. If you are doing it, you need to stop. Even with the medical side, okay, should kind of scare you that what's going to happen to me. And for those that are giving it to the young people or see them, I know this is true, yeah? I think this is a fact. The biggest market is the young people. I sometimes say to them, if you want to sell prime bottles, just stand outside high school, stand outside Eden, you get double the price for it. Honestly, just fill your whole butte up of prime bottles and you get double the money for it. Market is young people, but then you're destroying their futures as well. I'm not saying no one's going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. There'll be mistakes that we'll make that will haunt us for the rest of our lives. But once you know it's wrong, once you know the effects of it and you're still doing it, then, it's something which we need to think about. Okay? Again, Jazakallah for listening. Jazakallah to Brother Muhammad as well. Inshallah, I'll pass over to Mu'talha to go for Q&As. If you do have any questions for Brother Muhammad regarding what he's spoken about today as well, then by all means, you can type the question to him as well. 5 minutes? We'll try and get as much as we can, inshallah. 5 minutes more.
Very important advices. Don't want to elaborate. If what was said wasn't sufficient, then me adding anything else is pointless as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep our hearts at all times open. Because if He seals our hearts, if you think, yeah, it's all right. Bola Karim also, he's got nothing else to do. No, Rata. We'll get over it. We're not going to go down that route. Then unfortunately, the door's closed. If the door's closed, then you've got fikr to do. You need to be concerned. Always, that's the greatest concern you need to have. If you're giving advice and you don't listen to advice, if it falls on deaf ears, then unfortunately, you really need some serious spiritual help. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects one and all, inshallah. Just going through the questions, inshallah. La ilaha illallah. Subhan, I want pizza. Jazakallah. I want burgers and chips. MashaAllah. Huh? Tell Khalid. I don't know if what we're providing here, if it's not sufficient, then you can come see me, inshallah. I'll give you £2.50. It's not £1.50 anymore, is it? It's £2.50. We can get some burgers and chips, inshallah, from Nafia. No problems. When it's open. Many questions. I have a friend in Preston who has gone very left selling weed and THC. My question is, how do I convince him to give up? As he wants to, but chasing after money is one of the main priorities. He needs, obviously, best thing is, if he's engaged in these kind of things, if you're just selling it, then you just need to make him understand, tell somebody else to make him understand, his elders, your local ulama, whatever. If he's engaged in it himself, taking substance abuse, and he's not stopping, then best thing is he needs professional help. Seek professional help. Inshallah, that will assist him. Along with this, make dua for him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides him. And give him the right support. Support is the most important. Friend circle is the most important. If obviously he's got other friends who are spurring him and encouraging him to go down that route, then you just telling him is not going to be sufficient. He needs a whole network of individuals that will support him and try to assist him. Then inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open up his heart, inshallah. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, inshallah. How do we know that Islam is the true and righteous religion? There are many, obviously this is a topic on its own. There are many, many different signs, proofs of the truthfulness of Islam. Food is here. So the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, 5 minutes inshallah. Existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the need and the necessity of the Rasul and Prophets, the haqqaniyah and the truthfulness of the Quran. These are all topics in itself which a person can elaborate on, and entire lectures can be delivered. Inshallah, we've got next week this program regarding this specific thing, is the rational aspect of Islam and the truthfulness of Islam. Inshallah, hopefully that will open up to you. If you have any queries, if you have any doubts, then please, approach us. It's not something that we've not been asked before. The Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, sometimes they would come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say that, Ya Rasulullah, we also get these thoughts from shaitan, regarding deen, etc. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would advise them accordingly. So it's not something to be ashamed of. If you have something, if you have any queries, if you've read something, if you've heard something, if somebody's put something into your heart and mind which now is playing around, then come, ask, it's not a problem. Inshallah, hopefully we'll try to assist you, try to guide you, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us all steadfast, inshallah, and grant us the ability to understand the truthfulness of Islam, inshallah. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows who will go to Jannat and Jahannam, what is the point of Him creating us humans? Somebody asked this question last week, I think. Yeah. 2 weeks ago when we had with the youngsters over here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So obviously, okay, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, what was the point of creating us? He could have just took us straight into Jahannam or straight into Jannah. The people of Jahannam would turn around and say, Ya Allah, you put me straight into Jahannam, you didn't even give me a chance. Allah knows, we don't know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to take our course. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put halal and haram in front of us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown us a path, and now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to live our lives so that a person cannot turn around and say that you didn't give me a chance. And I gave the example to the kids here a couple of weeks ago, and I said, look, if your teacher knows that this student is going to fail, the teacher knows that this guy is just going to fail, and the teacher says, look, I'm not even going to put you in the exam, I'm just going to give you 0. I say that to my students a lot. But I would have given him a 0. I give him a paper. I say, write here, and they wouldn't write anything. And then I give him a 0. So I said, look, if I give him a 0 straight away, a student can always turn around and say, look, Master, you didn't give him a chance. You can always say, oh, you didn't give us a chance to sit the paper. How do you know if I would have sat the paper, I might have passed? How do you know I might have revised? How do you know I might have worked hard? How do you know I would have known that question? Teacher knows that you're not going to know it. You don't know it. I've been teaching for the last 9 months, or rather 9 years even, and I know you've not passed any of my papers, so you're not going to pass this one as well. So it's pointless. But the teacher, he has to. He'll give the paper, the student will do the paper, and then the teacher will say, I told you so. And now he won't have a leg to stand on, he won't be able to complain. So similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not just going to take and say, look, okay, go into Jannah or go into Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, okay, this is the truth, this is haqq, this is halal, this is haram. Take your course of life, now do what you need to do. And accordingly then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, okay, you deserve Jannah, and unfortunately these individuals, they will be destined for the fire of Jahannam, and they won't have an excuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we gave you a chance, we gave you an opportunity, we sent to you different ways of inviting you towards the deen, but you didn't take that route. So that is why unfortunately for you is the fire of Jahannam. So although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to actually go through that, so that we also realize that we were destined for the Jannah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from the fire of Jahannam. There's a very lengthy other paper here as well with loads of little questions. Obviously we don't have time. Majority of them are salat related questions, intricacies, little juziyats of little specific things regarding salat. Time does not permit to go into those questions, so we'll leave that for now. Another question here is regarding buying a cat and selling a cat. I don't like cats, so it's not something which I'll recommend and say yes. I know Mawlana Ilyas here has a cat. Oh, I think he died a few years ago. I've got another one now. Cats are permissible per se. So anything which are permissible you keep, so you can buy, you can sell as well. Whether you should or not, I think that money can be well spent elsewhere, inshallah, rather than spending. They're expensive. How much is it to maintain a cat? Anybody who has a cat? Hamza? Mali Hamza? Probably expensive. I know they're probably expensive to look after a cat anyway. So I think you can probably use that money to sponsor orphan in Sierra Leone or something. I think it'll be more beneficial. Khair, please look after your cats, because they do a lot of littering as well on the streets. So please keep that in mind as well. Otherwise, cats are permissible. You can buy, you can sell a cat. An individual has outstanding debts on his house, credit card, etc., and he has enough money to perform Hajj currently. So because of his outstanding finances, is Hajj currently still farz on him? And if he was to perform Hajj with this outstanding payment, would it be counted? If a person has so much of a debt, etc., which is because of which the finances which he has is not sufficient to pay off the debts, then obviously this individual, Hajj will not be necessary on him. If the time, even before his debts, he didn't have enough money as well. Before he accumulated the debts, he didn't have enough money. He's accumulated all these debts, and now he has this all these debts as well. So Hajj will not be farz on him, but he's got surplus money at this moment in time. His creditors are not exactly demanding the money from him. So for example, friends, family, somebody's giving him 5,000, somebody's giving him 2,000, somebody's giving him 10,000. So he owes all these people money, but none of them are really asking for him to repay at this moment in time. And so in this situation, he's got this amount of money, £10,000. So should he go for Hajj? The ruling is that ask those individuals first. Ask them. He said, look, I've got this amount of money excess. If you want me to pay some of your debt at this moment in time, then I can do so. But if I want to go for Hajj, if you allow me to go for Hajj, is that okay with you? You won't mind? And if they say, yeah, you can go for Hajj, and a person performs his Hajj, then his farz Hajj will be complete. There will be no problem. If they say, no, please pay off our debts first, then it's fine. He can pay off his debts and he doesn't need to go for Hajj. But if, as I said, if they allow him and he goes for his Hajj, then his Hajj farz will be complete. And even after that, once he pays off his debts and then he gets his money, then another Hajj will not become farz upon him. His farz Hajj has been completed and his obligation has been fulfilled. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to value the remaining days of Ramadan. Only a few days remain, just over 10 days. Tonight is the 17th of Ramadan. 17th of Ramadan was a very great day in the history of Islam. The Battle of Badr took place on this particular day. The Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu ta'ala anhum with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out on this day into the battlefield. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spent his entire night crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma in tahlik hadhihi al-isaba lam tu'bad fil ardi abada. That, Ya Allah, if this small little group of believers is to perish today, then Ya Allah, there'll be nobody left to worship you. It was through their sacrifices that we are sitting here 1400 years down the line in the Masjid in Preston, so many thousands of miles away. If they didn't give that sacrifice, if it wasn't for the Sahaba Kiram, if it wasn't for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if it wasn't for their du'as and their efforts, then the deen wouldn't have reached us. We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate their statuses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala illuminate their graves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them on behalf of the entire ummah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to be amongst them on the day of Qiyamah, and to be with them in Jannah, and to have the ability to sit with them the way we're sitting here today, sit with the Sahaba, sit with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannah. And brothers are requested that try to do some Isali Sawab for the Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, the Badriyin, specifically tonight. Try to do some Isali Sawab on the way out. The Masjid box is there as well. You can just post something in the Masjid box as well. It will help for the Masjid project as well. It will help for our own iman and hifadha of our deen, and it will be a means of Sawab for the Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب إليك. There's rooms to the sides. If you can make your ways to the side rooms first, and then inshallah we can come out into the passage area. Just follow the instruction of the volunteers. جزاكم الله خيرا.